In the shadows of Asia's modern skyline, where neon lights blind us to the past, there are stories buried, not forgotten, just ignored. Welcome to Ghosts of Asia. Here, we don't chase monsters. We uncover the ones that were left behind, beneath the concrete, beneath the rituals, beneath the silence. Tonight's story begins where peace was promised, but something else answered. A luxury high-rise in Mumbai, a meditation room built over sacred ground, and a man who just wanted a moment of calm, but instead found a doorway to a prayer that never ended. This is the prayer room they forgot to lock. Are you ready to descend? It began with an erasure, not the kind marked by fire or ceremony, but with steel beams, bulldozers, and the quick, cold signatures of men in suits. Beneath a blistering summer sun in Mumbai, a modest roadside dargah, old, cracked, and forgotten by many, stood in the way of progress. The shrine wasn't much to look at anymore. A crumbling green dome, a rusting gate half-eaten by vines, and fading calligraphy painted across its archway, verses that no one could fully read anymore. Yet every Thursday, someone still lit incense there. Stray petals could still be found strewn across the steps. The wind still carried the faint trace of rosewater and ash. But to the developers of the luxurious Daya Heights complex, it was just another obstacle, an abandoned spiritual relic standing between them and the billion-rupee view of the Arabian Sea. They promised to relocate it, a hollow word tossed to silence the old shopkeepers who whispered warnings and crossed themselves when walking past. The official papers were filed. A photo-op ceremony was staged. A marble plaque with the words, "Harmony through Renewal," was installed beside the construction site. And then, quietly, the foundation was poured over the earth where the shrine had once stood. What the public didn't know was that the developers hadn't actually moved the shrine's remains. The original bricks, blackened with age, weren't transported or preserved. They were sealed into the concrete base of basement level 1, compressed beneath what would become the building's most exclusive wellness amenity, a meditation and yoga room, bathed in soft lighting, diffused essential oils, and minimalist design. No one remembered the names of the men buried in that shrine, but the ground did. The old caretaker, a hunched man with cloudy eyes who had once swept the shrine's steps, had stood by as the machines arrived. He'd said nothing as they tore down the dome. He simply watched, his hands clutching a string of prayer beads that looked worn down by decades. "You cannot build peace on land that still remembers the call to prayer," he murmured to a foreman. The foreman laughed, barely listening. The caretaker spat into the dust, and then he disappeared. No one saw him again. The construction moved fast. By the end of the year, the tower stood tall, all chrome, glass, and imported stone. Daya Heights marketed itself as a haven for the elite. Urban tranquility meets spiritual rejuvenation. Their crowning jewel? The meditation yoga room tucked away in basement 1, cool, silent, and always empty. At first, it truly was serene. Residents described the room as having an odd, calming presence. "It's like the noise of the city just stops down there," one woman said during an opening tour. Another remarked, "I feel like I'm being watched, but not in a bad way, almost like someone is praying with me." No one thought it was strange. Not yet. Basement 1 was clean, freshly painted, and barely used, but something about the room made people pause before switching off the lights.
A faint hum seemed to linger when no music played. The security guards often avoided it at night, not because they were afraid, but because they said it made them feel heavy, as if the walls were pressing in on their chests. One guard joked that the room breathed. Another, older one, didn't laugh. He said he sometimes heard chanting down there, soft, rhythmic, in a language he didn't understand. When asked what it sounded like, he replied, "Like someone praying through cement." The tenants moved in. The meditation room became just another checkbox in a luxury lifestyle. And the shrine that had once stood, the lives that had once bowed there, cried there, pleaded with the divine in the middle of the night, were forgotten. Almost. Because late one evening, when the elevators were meant to stop running, when the hallway lights dimmed and the building went silent, someone pressed the button for Basement 1. And this time, it worked.
The elevators in Daya Heights were programmed not to descend to Basement 1 after 11 p.m. It was an automatic feature, a minor safety protocol, or so the management claimed. Residents rarely questioned it. After all, who needed meditation at midnight? But that rule, like so many things in the building, was more suggestion than law. One night, the panel lit up on its own. The security footage showed nothing remarkable: an empty hallway, the soft chime of the elevator bell, the mechanical glide of steel doors parting open. Then slowly, the number lit up, B1. No one stepped in, no one stepped out, yet the elevator moved downward. The guards blamed it on a glitch. Maybe the sensor had been triggered by dust, static, or poor maintenance. But when they tried to recreate the error the next morning, the button for Basement 1 didn't respond at all, not even with a key card. Still, one of them, the younger of the two, couldn't stop thinking about the grainy footage, how the elevator lingered down there for almost 4 minutes, how the camera flickered, how, in one frozen frame, the display panel above the door briefly read, Jamaat, a word that didn't belong to any floor. Later that week, the elevator technician arrived. He was efficient, unfazed, and vaguely bored. He opened the panel, clicked through diagnostics, ran a reset. Just some voltage instability, nothing unusual. Then he went downstairs to check the floor directly. He wasn't gone long. When he came back, he looked pale, his mouth dry, lips faintly parted like he'd forgotten to breathe. It's sealed. But I thought that room had carpet. The head of maintenance frowned. It does. White carpet. You installed it yourself. The technician shook his head. Not anymore. It's stone. Old stone. The kind you don't polish. The kind that absorbs sound. When they went down together later, the room looked completely normal. Clean, polished, gently lit by recessed LEDs. Fresh diffuser oils hung in the air, a faint scent of sandalwood and eucalyptus. The carpet was back. The floor was soft beneath their feet. No stone, no sound, no explanation. They said nothing more. That week, the power in the basement began to surge intermittently. Flickers of light, security alarms chiming at odd hours, and once, just once, a maintenance worker heard the pipes groan behind the meditation room's north wall. He placed his hand to the plaster. It was cold, wet, and pulsing ever so slightly, like a heartbeat. No one believed him, of course, but something else began to change, something not easily explained. Residents who used the meditation room started to report vivid dreams, dreams of narrow hallways lit by oil lamps, dreams of sand underfoot
and a feeling of something ancient whispering just out of sight. Some claimed they could hear distant singing while falling asleep, voices that didn't belong to any music they'd ever known. The building manager blamed it on stress, on the city, on urban noise pollution. "It's probably psychological," he said. "People project feelings onto empty spaces." And perhaps he was right. But the silence in the basement didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full. Full of something old. Full of something waiting. And sometimes, late at night, if you pressed your ear against the elevator shaft, you could hear something moving. Not mechanical, not electric. Something softer, like cloth dragging against stone, or a bare foot brushing against dust.
His name was Arav Mehta, 32, single, a senior systems engineer for a fast-growing tech firm that prided itself on changing the digital landscape. From the outside, he was the ideal tenant, well-spoken, well-paid, and mostly invisible. He worked from home, like most of the building's newer residents. 12-hour shifts spent staring into code, bouncing between Slack threads, Zoom calls, and endless error logs. Every night bled into the next. The city was loud, his sleep shallow, and his mind constantly wired. When his therapist recommended meditation, he laughed. "Do I look like someone who has the patience to chant and breathe for 30 minutes? But later that night, after another sleepless scroll through blue-lit screens and doom-scrolling finance threads, he remembered something. A quiet place, a wellness feature, Basement 1. He hadn't used it yet. In fact, he didn't even know how to get there. When he checked the elevator, the button for B1 was dimmed, inactive. He mentioned it offhandedly to the concierge the next day, who gave him a small brass key. "Here," the woman said, "for residents who want solitude. It's better after dark, less traffic." Arav didn't ask what she meant. That night, at precisely 2:03 a.m., he stood inside the silent elevator, turning the key just below the B1 button. The panel lit up. A soft chime. A slow descent. When the doors opened, the hallway greeted him like a whisper, cold, dimly lit, and profoundly still. He stepped out. There was no hum of machinery, no distant buzz of pipes or wires. The walls were smooth, painted off-white, and the floor was covered in soft gray carpet that swallowed every footstep. The door to the meditation room was unmarked, just a simple wooden panel with a circular bronze handle. He turned it slowly. Inside, the air changed. It wasn't cold exactly, but dense, heavy, as if it had been sealed for a long, long time. He stepped into the room. No one was there. No music, no lights. Just moonlight spilling through a small, high window, a shaft of silver cutting through the dark, falling directly onto a circular mat in the center of the room. Something about that beam of light pulled at him. He walked to the center and sat down cross-legged. His body creaked, unfamiliar with the posture, but he didn't care. He closed his eyes, he took a breath, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, the noise in his mind began to settle. Not vanish, but settle, like dust slowly sinking in water. Something pressed gently against the back of his thoughts, a warmth, a vibration, as though he wasn't alone, but not in a threatening way. It felt like someone was sitting behind him, praying for him. He stayed like that for nearly an hour. When he rose to leave, his knees numb and the carpet cool beneath his hands, he didn't feel anxious or afraid. He felt still and grateful. Before leaving, he glanced back at the room. It looked entirely unremarkable now. Just another quiet space in a building full of distractions.
but he knew something had met him there. The next night he returned. Same time, same key, same feeling. He brought no phone, no timer, no mantra. He simply sat, and once again he felt it, that presence, closer this time, like someone kneeling beside him. By the end of the week, it became his ritual. At 2 o'clock sharp, he would descend into the quiet, sit in the center of the room, and let his thoughts unravel. The stress peeled away like layers of old skin. The deadlines stopped screaming. His migraines vanished. His heart, once jittery and fast, now beat in rhythm with something else. Each night, the presence grew more vivid. He didn't see it, but he felt it, brushing past his shoulder like fabric in motion. Once, he smelled rosewater, faint and sweet. Another time, incense, heavy and sacred, clinging to the back of his throat like ancient memory. And once, when his mind drifted somewhere between sleep and trance, he thought he heard whispering. Not in English, not in Hindi, something else, a language he couldn't place, but it sounded old and kind. By morning, he felt reborn, and he began to crave that stillness, even if it came from somewhere no one could quite name.
At first, Arav told no one, not because he was hiding anything, but because he didn't know how to explain it. How do you describe silence that feels alive? How do you explain the comfort of being watched, not with malice, but with mourning? Still, something inside him shifted. His coworkers noticed it first. He showed up to calls calm, alert, almost distant, like someone who'd finally slept for the first time in years. His voice, once sharp and impatient, had turned slow and deliberate, as if each word had to pass through some unseen filter. "You seem different," his boss said one day. "Better." "I think I am," Arav replied. That night, he went down earlier, just after 1:30 a.m. The hallway to basement 1 was darker than usual. The bulbs overhead flickered once, then held steady. The carpet, normally smooth and silent, had a faint crunch underfoot, like grit or soil scattered beneath the surface. He brushed it off. Sleep-deprived imagination, nothing more. When he entered the meditation room, the air greeted him again, still and warm, as if it remembered him. He sat, breathed, waited. And then, without warning, he opened his eyes. There was nothing in front of him, no figures, no movement, but the feeling had changed. He was not being accompanied anymore. He was being watched, not from the room, from inside him. As if something now resided just beneath the surface of his skin, peering out through his eyes, curious and ancient. His breath quickened, but not out of fear, out of awe. He closed his eyes again and whispered something under his breath. He didn't know what it meant, didn't remember choosing the words, didn't even recognize the language. It flowed out of him like smoke, soft syllables shaped by a tongue that had never learned them. When he opened his eyes again, the single high window above the room had fogged up from the inside. He smiled. He didn't know why. 2 floors above, in apartment 7C, his neighbor woke from a nightmare, the kind that left her heart racing and the sheets damp. She dreamed of a man praying in the dark, not to God, to something beneath him. And behind the man, dozens of eyes blinked open in the dark like oil slicks, watching, waiting. Arav began to change in small ways. He stopped checking his phone. He started waking up before sunrise, sitting in silence, not moving, not speaking, just staring into the middle distance, as if listening to something no one else could hear. He burned incense in his apartment,
Not the kind sold in wellness stores, but thick, heavy coils that reeked of iron and wood rot. His bathroom mirror fogged every night, even with no hot water running. His dreams were long corridors filled with dust and whispering lips. One afternoon, he visited a second-hand bookstore in Baikula and bought a Quran. He wasn't Muslim. He'd never read Arabic. But when he opened it, he traced the calligraphy like he knew it, as if it stirred some deep, sunken memory. He didn't read it. He listened to it. And when he closed the book, he whispered again, that same unknown language, this time with reverence, this time with joy. He returned to the meditation room that night with bare feet. No key, no phone. Just a small glass vial of rose water and a piece of black fabric clutched in his hand. He pressed his forehead to the floor and began to hum, low, slow, melodic. It wasn't a song, it was a summons, and the room, or what was beneath it, began to respond. The air vibrated, the walls exhaled, and from somewhere far, far below the floor, something hummed back.
It began with a glitch. That's what the building staff called it, at least. A simple system malfunction, probably tied to the aging elevator control panel. They said it happened in old buildings sometimes, even fancy ones. But Daya Heights wasn't old. It was new, expensive, engineered for perfection. And yet for an entire week, the button for Basement 1 would vanish from the panel at random. Not just go dark, vanish completely, as if it had never existed. Residents noticed first. They reported it to reception. I pressed B1, but the elevator skipped it. There's no B1 anymore. It goes straight from G to B2. Is that even allowed? The concierge offered polite apologies, promised resets, offered to file maintenance tickets. Nothing more. But when the security team tried to manually override the controls, something stranger happened. The key, the brass key that Arav had once used, didn't fit anymore. It turned, clicked, but the elevator didn't move. It refused to descend, as if the system itself was protecting something, or being protected. Then came the reports, whispers, little things. One night, the janitorial supervisor, Sadiq, was called down to inspect a leak near B2. He took the service elevator, flashlight in hand. When he passed by the hallway leading to the meditation room, he stopped. The steel door was supposed to be locked. It was, but something was moving behind it. At first, he thought it was the hum of faulty ventilation, maybe feedback from the air purifier. But then he heard it clearly. Voices, dozens of them, layered, repeating the same line in multiple tongues: Arabic, Urdu, Sanskrit, Persian, Tamil. One voice over another, ancient and new, soft and cold. A chant. He stepped closer, pressing his ear to the cold metal. And then the voices stopped, all at once. A silence fell, so deep it felt like weight pressing against his chest. And then one voice spoke, just one, from the other side of the door. Calm, patient. It said his name, Sadiq. He dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, beam spinning wildly. When he picked it up, the door was still locked, still cold, still watching. He never told anyone what happened that night. But after that, he refused to work night shifts again.
Meanwhile, upstairs, strange things began to happen in apartment 8D. A new couple had just moved in, Ananya and Vikram, both young, successful, and deeply spiritual. They had specifically chosen Daya Heights for the meditation amenities and the promise of energetic alignment built into the architecture. But shortly after their arrival, they noticed something odd. The incense sticks they burned would extinguish within minutes, even in a windless room. The walls in their bedroom began to sweat, literally, droplets forming near the corners, smelling faintly of old bricks and rain-soaked earth. And every night, at precisely 2:06 a.m., their clock radio would crackle to life, whispering static that, if listened to closely, sounded like recitation. Anya once recorded it and ran it through an audio enhancement app. There were voices, not human, not mechanical, just breathing, overlapping, slow, rhythmic, like someone praying in a deep underground tomb. The building staff finally brought in a third-party technician to inspect the elevator system. He spent the day reviewing blueprints. That evening, he approached the manager, visibly shaken. He said, "There's something wrong with your design." "There is no basement one." The manager frowned. "Of course there is. There's a meditation room, wellness center." The technician turned the screen toward him. The architectural layout showed no access point, no wiring, no ventilation, no structural cavity labeled B1. "It doesn't exist," he whispered. "Not on paper, not in the wiring, not in the digital maps. It was removed." The manager insisted it must be a data error. But that night, when he tried to descend himself, the elevator refused him. And when he stood in the lobby staring at the panel, something chilled him to the bone. He realized the button for B1 wasn't dimmed, it wasn't deactivated. It was never there. He had only believed it was. But somewhere down in the dark, Arav was still entering the room, still humming, still praying, still unlocking a door that wasn't supposed to exist. It had been 23 days since Arav first entered the meditation room. His schedule no longer resembled anything normal. He slept during the day, often fully clothed, blinds drawn, with his bedroom cold as a tomb. He ate only fruit and plain rice. He no longer touched coffee. He no longer touched screens. But most notably, he had stopped blinking. Not entirely, but rarely, strangely, almost unnaturally. His eyes would remain open for minutes at a time, unmoving, as if he was reading something written behind the air itself. His neighbors began to avoid him in the elevator. Something about the way he stood, too still, too silent, unnerved them. Once someone said hello, and he simply smiled without looking, his eyes fixed straight ahead, unblinking, like a doll that hadn't yet been animated. His apartment began to change, too. It started with scent. The smell of rose water, soft and sweet at first, began to saturate the hallway. A warmth clung to his door, mixed with something metallic beneath it, like rust or old blood in sunlight. Maintenance came to check the plumbing. They found nothing wrong, but when one worker touched the metal handle of Arav's door, he recoiled. His palm had blistered instantly, as if he had pressed it to something sacred or cursed. Then there were the sounds. Late at night, tenants passing by reported hearing chanting from inside his unit. Not loud, not aggressive, just persistent. A low hum, always just out of comprehension. The rhythm matched no song, no mantra. Some described it as circular, a sound that had no beginning and no end. It wasn't being played from speakers. It was being spoken, murmured, offered, like a gift to something listening from behind the walls. Arav's social media accounts, long inactive, suddenly began posting again. Not selfies, not food, not tech rants, just words. Strings of text written backwards in multiple scripts: Arabic, Urdu, Sanskrit. Some posts were entirely mirrored, others appeared upside down. A few displayed only a single word, posted at exactly 2:06 a.m. every night: return. Each post was accompanied by a grainy black and white image, hard to decipher. On closer inspection, some users believed the images showed corridors, stone floors, walls covered in handprints. One even looked like a door with no handle, a door inside the room. But when friends reached out to check on him, no reply ever came. One woman, an old college friend, tried visiting him in person. When he opened the door, he looked normal, at first. But then she noticed the subtle things. His pupils were wide. His lips were cracked, but tinged faintly red, like he'd been biting them hard or drinking something too sweet. He invited her in, but she hesitated. The air inside the apartment felt thick. She described it later as breathing, but not with lungs. She excused herself quickly. He never stopped smiling. Not once. Not even when she backed away. Not even when the door slowly closed. Security was notified after the encounter, but when the guards visited his apartment later that night, they found the door unlocked and the entire space empty. Not cleared out, just empty. Furniture still there, lights still on, the scent of rosewater stronger than ever, but no sign of Arav, no clothing, no food, no toothbrush, no shoes. Just a single prayer mat in the center of the living room and a small puddle of dark water beneath it, as if someone had been kneeling for a very, very long time. At 2:06 a.m. that night, the CCTV feed captured something unexpected. The elevator descended. Basement 1 lit up, and just before the doors closed, Arav was seen standing inside, barefoot, eyes glassy, lips parted in silent prayer. As the doors shut, he turned toward the camera, and he smiled. His eyes rolled upward, and then the screen cut to black. He never walked out.
The security team reviewed the footage over and over. It didn't make sense. The door to the meditation room required a physical key, a specific brass key, logged, numbered, issued only through the concierge system. And yet, in the footage from 2:06 a.m., Arav opened the door without using it. No card swipe, no key turn, no override. He simply stood in front of the door, and it opened, as if the room had been expecting him. The head of building operations, Mr. Rakesh, demanded a system audit. He called the elevator technician back, brought in locksmiths. They inspected the door hardware, the sensors, the frame. Everything was functional. Everything worked as designed. And yet no one could explain the anomaly. No one wanted to. Because when one of the guards, the youngest, the least experienced, tried to manually unlock the door with the backup key, something strange happened. The key twisted halfway, then jammed, then turned itself the rest of the way. The guard dropped it instantly. The door didn't open, but something moved on the other side. He swore he heard the sound of bare feet stepping back, slow, one at a time, almost like someone was preparing, or retreating, or bowing. That night, he called in sick and never returned. Upstairs, in the security control room, another guard zoomed into the last known footage of Arav. That moment before the door opened, he paused it frame by frame. And in one frame, just one, something appeared behind Arav's reflection in the elevator. A shadow. Not a person, not a figure, a shape. A tall form wrapped in dark fabric, featureless, but clearly standing behind him, with one hand placed on his shoulder. The next frame, gone. They didn't report this. No one wanted to be the one to explain it to the tenants, or to the media, or to themselves. So they did the next best thing. They welded the door shut. Physically. Permanently. A full metal crossbar installed, thick enough to survive a fire. Reinforced bolts. A small sign placed beside it, closed for renovation. A lie, of course, but a comforting one. 2 days passed, then 3, all quiet, until the scent returned. It began to drift up the elevator shaft, not strong, not immediate, but slowly like steam from a buried spring. Rosewater, and something beneath it. Iron, char, sand. The kind of smell that belongs to holy places forgotten by time. On the 4th night, the elevator again descended on its own. B1 lit up. The camera caught it. The system logged no card. When the security team checked the floor, the hallway lights flickered violently. One guard claimed to hear a whisper echoing through the vents. Open. He is still praying. The next morning, the welded door was intact, but a faint black handprint was visible on the outer metal panel, smudged, pressed outward, as if someone or something inside had tried to touch the world again. And though the room was locked, it was never truly sealed, because what had been awakened wasn't behind a door anymore. It was beneath the foundation, beneath the walls, beneath their feet, waiting, watching, worshiping. It was raining that night, not heavily, just a soft, endless drizzle that clung to windows like breath. The sky over Mumbai hung low, gray and silent. A storm without thunder, a warning without voice. The clock in the Daya Heights lobby ticked past 2 a.m., then 2:05, and then exactly at 2:06, the elevator doors opened on the ground floor. No one had pressed the button, but Arav stepped in, barefoot, wearing a plain white kurta, damp at the hem, as if he had walked through water that wasn't there. He didn't look up. He didn't glance at the camera. He simply stood inside the elevator, eyes glazed, body still. When the doors began to close, he moved, slowly, deliberately, and looked directly into the security lens. He smiled. It was the kind of smile no one wants to receive. Too wide, too calm, too knowing. And his eyes, the whites fully exposed, pupils rolled back, as if something else had taken his place and was simply borrowing the body. Then the screen cut to static. The elevator log showed it descended to basement 1. No one ever saw him again. The next morning, the security staff reviewed the footage. They paused the video at that final moment, Arav's face frozen mid-smile, the camera catching a faint glimmer behind him. A movement, a second figure, not entirely visible, but unmistakable. A dark outline, something tall, draped in cloth, standing just outside the camera's focus, watching, unmoving, shadow without light. Apartment 10B, directly above the basement, reported something strange that same night. The tenant woke up choking,
not from illness, but from dust. His mouth filled with it, his pillow coated in it. He had gone to sleep with a glass of water on his nightstand. In the morning, it was thick with brown sediment. He checked the ceiling. No leak, no cracks, no explanation, just silence. Over the following days, more tenants began reporting similar dreams, burial dreams. They dreamt of being lowered into narrow shafts, stone walls pressing inward, their bodies wrapped in linen, eyes open, unable to scream. A call to prayer echoed from above, beautiful, mournful, and distant, but no one came to save them. When they awoke, they found dust in the corners of their mouths. One woman coughed up a small stone. Another, an elderly man, was found sleepwalking at 2 a.m., standing in front of the elevator, whispering a prayer in Arabic, even though he didn't speak the language. Back in the security office, the head guard tried to explain away the footage. "It's tampering," he insisted. "Someone edited the tapes." But when the footage was pulled directly from the drive, untouched, original, the timestamp matched perfectly. The descent to B1 was real, the camera angle was real, and Arav was gone. His apartment remained untouched. Police were called. They found no sign of forced entry, no signs of violence, no passport, no wallet. Just a single word written in chalk on the back of the front door. Fana. An old word, Sufi in origin. It means annihilation of the self, the final step in divine union. No missing persons posters were issued. The building management discouraged gossip. His name was quietly removed from the resident directory. The door to the meditation room remained welded shut. But each night, exactly at 2:06 a.m., the elevator still descended. No one said the name Arab anymore. Not in the elevators, not in the group chats, not in the hallways between yoga class and valet pickup. At Daya Heights, silence had become policy. A soft, curated silence, the kind that hangs in luxury buildings when something unpleasant happens just outside the edge of comfort. But silence is not absence. It is only the surface, and beneath it, something had begun to move. It started with the dreams. Whispers of them passed like urban legends between residents and maids, drivers and doormen. Dreams of burial, but not in a coffin and not in earth. The dreamers described it the same way. Stone pressing inward, mouth packed with dust, arms pinned to their sides, their screams swallowed by a silence so thick it felt alive. Above them, always, came the same sound, the call to prayer. Not loud, not distant, but just above the stone ceiling, just beyond reach, a voice calling out, not to God, but to the forgotten. And in the dreams, they could never tell if they were being buried alive or being reborn underground. When they awoke, they felt it physically. Dry mouths, clogged throats, some coughed up flecks of grit. Others found mud between their teeth. One woman, a doctor, discovered a thin film of white dust on her tongue every morning, no matter how often she brushed. And the most disturbing detail? The dreams always occurred at the same time, 2:06 a.m. The building therapist, a soft-spoken counselor hired for high-stress tenants, began receiving frantic calls. One resident couldn't sleep unless all the lights were on. Another reported a shadow walking across their ceiling, even when no one else was in the room. A child on the 9th floor stopped speaking entirely after saying he prays from inside the floor, then pointing directly downward. When the therapist tried to suggest anxiety, exhaustion, even collective stress, one woman snapped, "This isn't stress. This is something under us." The dream spread to staff, to visitors, even to pets. A purebred husky refused to step into the elevator after midnight. It would growl at the floor, not bark, growl, low and guttural, like it sensed a predator beneath the tiles. The night guards began rotating shifts to avoid the early morning hours. But even then, even wide awake, one of them admitted seeing a figure reflected in the polished lobby glass, a man in a white kurta, barefoot, walking into the elevator. But when he turned around, there was no one there. And always, there was the dust. It appeared in strange places, inside sealed cabinets, on the soles of newly polished shoes, floating in the air near the elevator shaft like ash after a long-forgotten fire. A thin, fine, sacred kind of dust, the kind found in tombs and holy places untouched by time. In one chilling incident, the residents of floors 1 through 4 woke up to find their doormats covered in a thin semicircle of it, perfectly drawn, identical. Each curve faced inward, toward their front doors, as if something had stood there, watched, and left a mark. Management brought in industrial cleaners. Air filters were replaced, HVAC systems inspected, walls repainted, but nothing worked. The dust always came back, and each time it returned, it was accompanied by something new. A scent, a sound, a pressure in the walls that couldn't be explained. And always the dreams. Not everyone was afraid. Some began to welcome the dreams. They described them not as nightmares, but visions. A man in shadow offering peace, a warmth in the cold, a silence more profound than any guided meditation could offer. They would wake up crying, smiling, changed. And always, when asked to describe what they saw, they would whisper the same word, Fana.
The internet never forgets, even when people do. Even when buildings erase names from directories and neighbors pretend a man never lived on the 6th floor, the internet holds the ghosts. And Arav's ghost, whatever it had become, had not stopped speaking. Not long after his disappearance, his old social media accounts stirred back to life. Accounts that had been dormant for months. Twitter, Instagram, even LinkedIn. One by one, they began posting again. Cryptic, jarring, and deeply wrong. At first, it was just text, single sentences, short lines. But when users tried to read them, the words made no sense because they were written backwards, perfectly mirrored, and not just in English, Urdu, Arabic, Sanskrit, sometimes all three, layered in a single post, flowing together like a braid of ancient languages tied tight around a single message. A few online sleuths took notice. They flipped the images, transcribed the text, tried to decode the patterns. What they found was disturbing. Each line appeared to be a prayer, a chant, a whispered fragment of something unfinished. But there was no God named, no plea for mercy, no ask for salvation, just invocation.
One recurring phrase appeared again and again. He prays us into being. Others included, beneath silence, he listens. We are dust that remembers. Open your mouth, and the earth shall answer. Some of the posts included images, not high-res selfies or landscapes, but grainy black and white snapshots of walls, floors, and stone corridors. One image showed what looked like a circular room, nearly identical to the meditation room in basement 1, but older, cracked, weathered by time. Another image showed a figure kneeling in prayer, head bowed, but when users tried to zoom in, the face was missing, blacked out, as if erased or never born. The posts grew more frequent and more personal. He began tagging people, tenants from Daya Heights, old co-workers, even his family. Each tag accompanied by a different line of mirrored text. One co-worker received a notification in the middle of the night, a new post tagging her name with a caption written entirely backwards. You walked above him. Did you not feel it? She deleted her account, moved out of the city 2 weeks later. No forwarding address. The building's management tried to explain it away. Maybe someone had hacked Arav's accounts. Maybe it was AI generated. Maybe it was part of some strange guerrilla marketing campaign. But even offline, the signs kept appearing. Someone or something began writing phrases on the walls of the building. In chalk, backwards, always at 2:06 a.m., always in silence, always erased by morning. But residents began to photograph them. They matched the prayers online, word for word, and worse still, the handwriting matched Arav's. One night, a young tech executive from the 5th floor attempted to debunk the whole thing. He created a script to track the posts in real time. At 2:06 a.m., Arav's Instagram posted a single image, a close-up of an elevator panel. Basement 1. Only this time, the button was bleeding. Not photoshopped. Real blood, dark, sticky, trailing down the steel. Below it, a caption. He opens what should remain closed. By sunrise, the post was gone, but the damage was done. Dozens of accounts began reposting. The algorithm picked it up. Paranormal forums lit up. And still, Daya Heights remained silent, locked, polished, gated. But no matter how high the floors went, no matter how far above the clouds they reached, the prayers continued, backwards, beneath the surface, calling not for heaven, but for return.
The letter arrived without a stamp. No sender, no address. Just a single sheet of yellowed paper slipped under the door of the building's management office in the dead of night. The handwriting was elegant, old, each line written in black ink, steady and deliberate. At the top, only one word: you forgot. Beneath it, verses from ancient texts, forgotten surahs, supplications not found in any common prayer book. It ended with a name scribbled in faint calligraphy: Imam Zamiruddin Qureshi. No one in the office recognized the name, but someone in the neighborhood did. They found him just outside the northern district, in a narrow alley wedged between two spice shops. A quiet, skeletal man with clouded eyes, sitting on a prayer mat that looked older than the street beneath him. He had once been the caretaker of the Dargah, the one they tore down, the one sealed beneath Daya Heights like a secret under glass. He had not spoken to anyone in years, not since the demolition, not since the machines came. But when they said the word basement, he stirred. And when they said meditation room, he opened his mouth and began to chant. Not a song, not a prayer, but a warning. Low, rhythmic, measured, like the strike of a drum that marks the start of a ritual. And then he spoke. They built their stillness on a grave. They sealed prayer beneath steel. And now it breathes through concrete, not because it is angry, but because it is unheard. He described it with trembling hands. The Dargah had not been empty. There had been relics, bones, cloth, holy scripts. But most importantly, a name never to be spoken aloud, not by those who did not wear the veil of devotion. A name prayed to only in whispers, a name never written, a name that had no translation, only weight. And when the shrine was destroyed, the ground was not appeased. No ritual, no parting prayer, no transfer of memory, just dust and silence and the pouring of cement over a wound that had never closed. He told them that the room below was not cursed because curses come from wrath. This was something else. This was remembrance. The space below remembered its purpose, even if the world had forgotten. And it had found a voice again, in Arav, in those who dream, in the dust, in the pipes, in the patterns written backward in digital code. He pointed a crooked finger toward the sky, toward the tip of the luxury tower scraping the clouds, and said, "You raised your homes above the place where men once fell to their knees. Now the dead must stand because the living refuse to kneel." The building's manager asked what could be done, how to stop it, seal it, close it. The old man only laughed, a dry, cracking sound. You cannot close what was never opened by human hands. You did not break a rule, you broke rhythm, and rhythm always returns. They tried to take him back to the office, but when they turned away, just for a moment, he was gone, vanished into the alleyways of the city like a smoke that remembers where to go. All that remained was the prayer mat, folded neatly, still warm, and beneath it, pressed into the stone, a single fingerprint, charred black, pointing downward. They said the meditation room had been welded shut, sealed, silenced, forgotten. But doors are only barriers to the blind, and steel is only strong when the sacred does not remember how to breathe. On the 3rd of the following month, a resident named Samir decided to film a vlog about energy centers in luxury buildings, a harmless trend, aesthetic, polished, spiritual, the perfect mix for clicks. He brought his camera down to basement 1. The elevator, strangely, allowed him access without a key. No resistance, no delay. The button lit up like it had been waiting. When he stepped out, the hallway lights flickered once, then held. Everything looked normal, too normal, the kind of clean that feels artificial, like a showroom nobody lives in. The air was heavy, still. He whispered for effect, speaking into the lens, trying to sound enlightened. "This is where the stillness lives," he said. "They say silence heals." Then he turned toward the sealed door of the meditation room, and for just a moment, just a heartbeat, he saw movement behind the tiny reinforced glass panel, a curtain fluttering inside. But there was no curtain,
No windows, no vents. Nothing should have moved. He leaned in, raised the camera, and pressed record. Later, when he reviewed the footage in his apartment upstairs, everything looked fine. At first, just quiet, dim, unremarkable. But at the 2-minute mark, as the camera zoomed in on the sealed window, something appeared. A pair of eyes, not human, not glowing, just there, black, reflective, watching through the glass. Not blinking, not moving, only present. And behind those eyes, deeper in the room, the faint outlines of figures, multiple, layered, stacked like shadows on shadows. They stood completely still, unmoving, as if paused mid-prayer. Samir dropped his phone. He tried to play the footage again, but the file had corrupted, not deleted, reversed. The video now played backward, and in the audio layer, under the static, something whispered in a language he did not know but understood. One sentence, repeating, soft, loving, final. Come sit with us. Samir moved out 3 days later. He left his apartment fully furnished, did not sell, did not list, just left. His belongings remained untouched for weeks, until someone noticed the mirror in his bathroom. Across its surface, thin lines had been drawn, not with ink, not with blood, but with breath, as if someone had exhaled messages from the other side of the glass. When illuminated under UV light, they formed eyes, dozens, layered like a crown, each watching, each open. And behind them, a single word etched deep into the surface. Witness. Witness to what? The question lingered like scent in the hallway. Residents began avoiding mirrors at night. Some covered them with cloth, others shattered theirs completely. But no matter what they did, they still saw the reflections. In window glass, in elevator panels, in still water. Eyes that didn't blink, eyes that didn't accuse, eyes that only waited, patient, ancient, and behind them, movement.
They were new, Ananya and Dev, young, successful, unbothered by old rumors and half-whispered stories from tenants who had already broken their leases. They had moved into Daya Heights for the skyline, for the spa, for the prestige. They did not care about the past. They did not ask about the locked door in the basement. They never read the forums. And when the concierge handed them their keys, they smiled and said, "We're not superstitious." They said it twice. The second time, they said it after their hallway lights flickered for no reason. On their third night, the elevator malfunctioned, or so they thought. They were on their way to the gym, half asleep, half listening to a podcast, when the elevator jerked once, then stopped. The panel went dark. When it flickered back to life, it displayed B1. Neither of them had pressed it. The elevator descended slowly, too slowly. And then, with a soft chime, the doors opened. The hallway beyond was dim, silent, cooler than it should have been. They stepped out, reluctantly, confused. They didn't know what the meditation room was supposed to look like. They didn't know the door was welded. They didn't know it was meant to be sealed, because the door was open. Not wide, just enough to invite. A warm amber glow spilled from inside. Candlelight, maybe. A glow that didn't flicker like electricity, but pulsed like something breathing in a room with no air. Dev stepped forward first. "Hello?" he called.
No answer, only silence, and the faintest scent of something familiar. Ananya whispered, "Rosewater." Inside, the room looked nothing like the photos they'd seen online. There was no sleek carpet, no LED lighting, no air diffuser or yoga mats. The walls were bare stone, ancient, cracked, and impossibly old. The floor was uneven and cold beneath their feet. There were symbols carved into the wall, deep, ritualistic, not decorative. And at the far end of the room, a single oil lamp sat on a low stone altar. It was lit, steady, unmoving. Dev raised his phone to take a picture. The screen went black. Battery full, still dead. Ananya tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. The moment she stepped past the doorway, a pressure built in her ears, like they'd gone underwater. And in that muffled silence, she thought she heard it. Not chanting, not prayer, breathing. Their own? No. Something else. Close. Watching. Kneeling. They backed away, carefully, respectfully. The door did not slam, the light did not flicker, no ghost screamed or rushed them. Only one thing changed. As they stepped out, the door slowly, gently, began to close, by itself, as if returning to sleep. And just before it shut completely, Ananya turned to look one last time. In the farthest corner of the room, just outside the reach of the lamp's glow, she saw someone kneeling, head bowed, motionless, unaware of them, or pretending to be. She blinked. Gone. When the elevator carried them back up, they didn't speak. Not until the door to their apartment closed behind them. Not until the lights were on. Not until they could hear the city again. Cars, voices, life. Then Ananya turned to Dev and whispered, "That wasn't a room. That was a memory." He didn't answer, because he was still staring at the palms of his hands. Dust. Fine, gray, sacred, pressed into the lines of his skin. They found the letter taped to the door of apartment 6C. It was written on handmade paper, thin, fibrous, the edges singed as if passed near flame. There was no envelope, no stamp, no name. Just a symbol drawn in red ink. A simple shape, a doorway, framed by eyes. And beneath it, a single line in faint Urdu script. What is taken in silence must be returned with devotion. The tenant, Miss Karuna Desai, had not been seen in 3 days. When security entered the apartment, they found no signs of struggle. The bed was made, the fridge was stocked, the balcony door slightly ajar, but the living room had changed. The carpet had been rolled back, the furniture pushed to the edges of the room, and in the center, someone had laid down a woven mat. Not a modern one. It was coarse, old, the kind used in prayer centuries ago, fraying at the edges, dust clinging to its threads. On top of the mat was a small brass bowl, filled with rose water, darkened, tinged with something thicker at the edges, like diluted blood. And beside the bowl, her phone, still recording. The video was only 42 seconds long, but no one who watched it ever forgot it. It began with Karuna sitting cross-legged on the mat, eyes closed, lips moving silently. There was no sound, No chanting, no whisper, only the hum of the building. Then she opened her eyes, wide, glassy, as if she hadn't blinked in hours. She dipped her fingers into the bowl and traced a line across her forehead, down her throat, across her chest. Then she spoke. One sentence, not in Hindi, not in English, but in a tongue that felt pre-language, heavy with breath, ancient with sorrow. And as she finished, she smiled, not in fear, but in peace, and whispered, "I return what was taken." Then the screen went black. Her body was never found. Her clothes remained, her ID, but the rosewater had dried into the mat, forming a perfect circle beneath where she had sat. No trace of struggle, only offering. In the days that followed, other tenants began to experience similar compulsions. One man in 4B began drawing symbols on his bathroom mirror each morning, though he had no memory of doing so. A young dancer on the 11th floor rearranged all the furniture in her home to face west, toward the elevator shaft, then claimed she was aligning her breath with his. And in apartment 9A, a couple awoke to find their beds surrounded by small bowls of rosewater, none of which they had placed there. It was no longer enough to watch. Now, it wanted participation. The room below had been patient. It had whispered. It had waited. But all devotion, even the silent kind, eventually demands sacrifice. Not out of cruelty, but out of memory. Because when a shrine is desecrated, what was sacred does not disappear. It lingers. And when the world forgets, it calls for those willing to remember. Even in blood, even in sleep, even in silence. It began as a sound, not loud, not urgent, but unmistakable. At exactly 4:44 a.m., just before the first light of dawn touched the windows of Daya Heights, a bell rang. One single note, low, bronze, ancient. It didn't belong to any system in the building. No alarm, no door chime, no elevator mechanism. But everyone who heard it described it the same way. It didn't come from above. It came from below. The first person to report it was an elderly tenant on the 12th floor. He had been awake, sitting by the window in silence, something he did often since his wife passed. When the bell rang, he stood up. He said later that it wasn't curiosity that moved him, it was recognition. "I've heard that sound before," he whispered, "a long time ago, in a mosque that doesn't exist anymore." Later that morning, the residents' WhatsApp group began buzzing. Some thought it was construction. Others claimed it was just imagination. But by the next day, more people heard it. And by the end of the week, everyone had heard the bell at least once, always at 4:44 a.m. Never before, never after, only then, only once. But the bell wasn't the only sound. Soon it was followed by something else, a kind of chanting, barely audible like voices humming through water. Different languages, different rhythms, all speaking at once, yet somehow in harmony. Arabic, Farsi, Sanskrit, even tongues no one could place. Some tenants said it sounded like prayer. Others said it sounded like mourning. And still others claimed it was neither. "It's not being spoken to God," one woman said. "It's being spoken to us." One man, a musician on the 8th floor, tried to record the sound.
He placed a microphone near his window just after 4:30 a.m. The file captured nothing but static, except for 1 second. Exactly at 4:44:01, a voice broke through, layered, distorted, impossible, and yet clear. It said, "Stand where they fell. Pray what they could not finish." The bell kept ringing. Every morning, some residents began waking before it, standing barefoot in their living rooms, eyes closed, as if summoned. Not all remembered doing so. Others recorded themselves during the night. They found footage of themselves walking to the windows, standing still, whispering. And in every video, at the exact moment the bell rang, they smiled, slow, reverent, eyes half-lidded, as if seeing something beyond the room. And then came the strangest detail of all. A tenant who had been deaf since birth reported hearing the bell, not with his ears, but inside his body. He described it as a vibration through bone, echoing down his spine, expanding in his chest. He wept when it happened, not from fear, but because he said it was the first sound he'd ever known that felt like a memory. The building tried to ignore it, tried to explain it. They blamed faulty plumbing, outside festivals, morning calls from distant mosques. But no one believed it anymore, because the bell didn't stop. And the prayers that followed weren't echoing through the building. They were rising from underneath it, from the sealed room, from the bones beneath the floor, from the dust that remembered how to call the living into sacred stillness. And now it was ringing for everyone.
It began with the lights. Apartment 6C, Arav's old unit, had been unoccupied since the incident. No tenant, no key holder, no one on the lease. The room was empty, locked, and under surveillance. And yet, each night, between 2 and 2:30 a.m., the lights inside would flicker on, not all at once, in rhythm. First the hallway, then the kitchen, then the bedroom, then the living room, where the prayer mat still sat untouched in the center of the floor. The lights pulsed gently, not like electricity struggling to hold, more like breathing. Inhale, exhale, light, dark, again and again. At first, security assumed a wiring fault. They cut power to the unit, but the lights still turned on. Battery backups? No. Hidden generators? None. When they opened the circuit panel, every breaker tied to 6C had melted. Then came the sound from the ceiling of the floor below, soft and low like distant thunder beneath a mosque dome. It wasn't music, it wasn't speech, it was prayer. Not from speakers, not a recording. The apartment itself had begun to recite. No words, no mouth, only vibration. Walls that pulsed with sacred rhythm, floorboards that murmured old syllables, pipes that groaned in time with some ancient beat, as if water itself had learned to remember. A cleaner, assigned to do routine maintenance on the empty floor, tried entering 6C with a master key. The door would not open. Not jammed, not locked, simply still. She placed her ear against the wood. On the other side, she heard it. A voice. Deep, resonant, not male, not female, just vast,
and it was whispering in repetition, "He is not gone. He is not gone. He is not gone." She quit the next day. After that, the residents on the same floor started noticing changes. Their clocks reset themselves to 2:06 a.m., regardless of time zone. Candles lit without flame. TVs turned on, playing static that pulsed like a heartbeat. One man reported waking in the middle of the night to find his apartment filled with the scent of burning oud, strong, holy, and disorienting. And on his wall, drawn in condensation, a single eye, open, watching, positioned exactly above where his head rested on the pillow. The building manager attempted to bring in contractors to inspect 6C. 2 electricians refused to enter. The third stepped inside for exactly 45 seconds before stumbling out, hands shaking. He wouldn't explain what he saw. He only said, "That's not an apartment anymore. That's a mouth." One evening, a group of neighbors decided to film the strange activity from the hallway. They placed a motion-triggered camera facing the door. The footage captured nothing for the first hour. Then, at 2:06 a.m., the door to 6C opened on its own, just slightly, a few inches, enough to reveal a flickering orange glow from inside, candlelight, warm and constant. And then, something moved in front of the door. Not a person, a shadow, shape without body, outline without form. It passed across the gap like a curtain swept by breath, and then it knelt, right there, in the doorway, facing inward, not looking at the camera, not acknowledging the hall, only bowing, head lowered, back straight, praying. For what? To whom? No one could say. But when the door closed again, silently, the hallway grew colder, and across the camera lens, for just one frame, a phrase appeared, fogged as if whispered onto the glass. "He is within the walls now." The next morning, the prayer mat inside 6C was no longer centered. It had been shifted slightly east, facing Mecca. It started with a leak, a simple, steady drip in the sub-basement, somewhere beneath the sealed-off access tunnel the blueprints never showed. The janitorial crew reported it first, a soft tapping that echoed through the maintenance hallway like a slow, persistent knock. When they followed the sound, it led them to a wall that shouldn't have existed, a sealed partition behind the elevator shaft, buried behind unused piping. And from the base of that wall, something was bleeding through. Not water, not sewage, but a thick, reddish-brown fluid. It moved slowly, too slowly, thicker than rain, thinner than blood. The crew called it mud, but even they didn't believe that. It smelled of iron, rose petals, and smoke. They reported it to upper management. A temporary patch was ordered. The leak kept coming back, worse each time, until it began pulsing like a heartbeat. An outside contractor was called in, an older man who had worked construction in the city for over 3 decades. When he saw the source of the leak, he didn't speak. He simply removed his gloves, touched the wall with his bare hand, and dropped to his knees. No explanation. He stayed there, weeping silently. When they asked him what he felt, he whispered, "This place was not supposed to be covered. You buried it alive." Later, when the structural team arrived, they tried to scan the ground beneath the foundation with sonar and ground-penetrating radar. What they found changed everything. The readings showed voids, pockets of empty space, chambers, unmapped hollows beneath the concrete slab, almost perfectly symmetrical, aligned like ribs beneath the spine of the tower. And in the very center, a circular chamber directly below basement 1. There was no entrance, no tunnel, no architectural path to reach it, but it was there. And the scanner picked up something else. Movement. A low-frequency vibration, constant, pulsing, in sync with the time of night the prayers began upstairs. One technician refused to continue the scan. He backed away from the machine and said, "There's something breathing down there. Not alive, just remembering how to be." Meanwhile, the leak began to spread. Not up through the walls, but out into dreams. Residents started describing visions of ancient rooms buried in stone, lit by oil lamps, with walls covered in names no one could pronounce. Some saw images of people kneeling in rows, their mouths open, but no sound coming out, just dust pouring from their lips like incense smoke. One man dreamt of falling through his mattress into a cavity lined with prayer mats, each one occupied by a figure with no face. When he woke, the soles of his feet were black with soot. The building's head engineer attempted a core drill to release pressure beneath the foundation. When the drill hit the central void, it made a sound no machine should ever make. It sang. A high, ringing tone that echoed through the metal and vibrated the floors of 5 levels above. The workers dropped their tools. One began whispering in Arabic, though he only spoke Hindi. Another knelt down, touched the floor with both hands, and said, "He's underneath us. He's always been." They sealed the drill, filled the hole, welded the plates. They tried to stop it, to bury it again. But some things do not want release. Some things want remembrance. Because the foundation of Daya Heights was never dry. It was never neutral. It was sacred ground soaked in memory. And what had been silenced was beginning to rise.
At 2:06 a.m., the elevator descended again. No button was pressed, no resident was inside, but the camera recorded it anyway. And this time, the feed didn't cut out. This time, the building saw everything. The elevator doors opened onto basement 1, to the hallway no longer on the blueprints, to the sealed meditation room whose door had long since been welded shut. Except now, it stood wide open. Not broken, not forced, simply open, as if the steel had remembered how to surrender, as if it too had begun to pray. Inside, the room was no longer the same. Gone was the designer carpet. Gone were the soft LED strips and polished wood. In their place, stone, dust, firelight flickering from oil lamps that had no fuel source. And on the floor, in a perfect circle, stood figures, 12 of them, cloaked in black, barefoot, unmoving. Each one facing the center, each one bowed forward,
hands placed on the ground, foreheads nearly touching floor in a position of deep prayer. Their bodies cast no shadow, their robes had no seam, and their faces were blank, smooth where features should be, like clay not yet carved, or faces worn down by centuries of wind and ash. But their posture spoke of reverence, of memory, of something sacred continuing long after the world had forgotten what began it. The camera feed continued, unblinking, uninterrupted. At the edge of the room, Arav appeared. He stepped in from the corner, slow and barefoot, wearing white. His face had changed, not aged, but stilled, softened. As if he had been in silence for so long, even his skin had forgotten how to form expressions. He walked to the center of the circle, knelt, and whispered something that could not be heard, not by mics, not by monitors, not by the world above. And then, the figures, all 12, rose at once, in perfect rhythm, not sudden, not dramatic, just smooth, like pages turning in the same breath of wind. They stood around him. One by one, they placed their hands on his shoulders, his head, his back. A silent ritual, a blessing, a coronation, or a burial in reverse. Then, in the final moment before the feed cut to black, Ara turned and looked directly into the camera. His eyes were no longer white, no longer human. They had become windows, dark, vast, and reflective. And in their surface, the camera caught it, not the room, not the figures, but stone steps leading downward into something deeper, older, endless. When security played the footage back the next morning, they found nothing. The file had erased itself, but the timestamp remained. 2:06 a.m. And the power log showed something else. Every single light in the building had dimmed for exactly 12 seconds during the recording. 12 lights, 12 figures, 12 steps of a ritual that no one alive remembered. But the room remembered. The foundation remembered. And now, so did the building.
They tried again, with new tools, new prayers, new men. The footage from the night before was gone, but rumors spread faster than surveillance, and now the residents were asking questions the management couldn't silence. Who were those figures? Why does the elevator keep going down? Where is Aroth? The official response was to act, to seal, to erase, to pretend it was never there. An elite demolition crew was brought in, specialists in urban redevelopment, with experience handling sacred grounds, ancient crypts, even war sites. They were paid triple, but even they hesitated. One of them, a man who had never believed in ghosts, paused in front of the meditation room door and whispered, "It's still listening." Still, they proceeded. The hallway was cleared. Metal sheeting was drilled into the walls. Reinforced concrete poured over the seams. Religious leaders from 3 different faiths were invited to perform rituals over the site. They read from holy texts. They lit incense. They burned camphor. They circled the space with salt and oil. And for one brief moment, it worked. The hallway quieted. The floor stopped vibrating. The scent of rosewater faded. The door was no longer a door, just a slab of sealed stone, anonymous and unremarkable. For 12 hours, everything felt normal, too normal, as if silence had become a skin stretched tight over something still breathing underneath. Then, at 2:06 a.m., it returned, not as noise, not as light, but as smoke. Thick, curling smoke began pouring out from the air vents. It smelled of burning prayers, parchment, rose oil, and blood.
Sprinklers activated, alarms blared, but nothing stopped it. The smoke coated the walls of the upper floors, and on those walls, written in soot, appeared one repeating phrase: "You cannot relocate the sacred." Tenants began to panic. One woman collapsed in the lobby claiming she felt someone else's breath inside her lungs. Another man stripped off his clothes and walked barefoot to the elevator, chanting a prayer he had never learned, a verse lost to time, his voice calm, his body trembling. The children cried, the elders wept, and the building, tall, modern, once a symbol of prestige, now echoed like a temple that had been built without permission. Back in the sub-basement, the demolition crew discovered something worse. The wall they had sealed was cracked from the inside. Not broken, not shattered, pressed outward, as if something beneath it had expanded, grown, awakened. One of the workers touched the crack with a gloved hand. He began to scream. They pulled the glove off. His skin had blistered in perfect symmetry. 12 circles burned into his palm, matching the positions of the figures seen in the footage. They fled, left their tools, left the job, and none of them ever returned. After that, the management gave up. They locked the sub-basement behind 5 security codes, 2 biometric scanners, and an NDA so strict it might as well have been a curse. They changed the blueprints again. They renamed Basement 1 as Storage Overflow. They told new residents the elevator skips a level for Design Flow. They rewrote the building's origin story. They said no shrine was ever here. The land was empty, pure, ours. But the land knows better. The foundation remembers the prayers crushed beneath steel. And each night, when the city sleeps, the hallway beneath Daya Heights whispers not in anger, but in invitation.
He had just moved in. A young man named Rayhan, a new tenant, fresh from Delhi, unaware of the history buried beneath his new address. He chose Daya Heights for the quiet, for the view, for the promise of stillness. He didn't know the rumors, didn't care about prayer rooms or sealed doors. The concierge smiled. The key worked. The apartment was pristine. And for his first 2 nights, everything was fine. Until the 3rd. That night, he dreamt of a hallway he had never seen. White walls, dim lights, cold air. He walked barefoot across smooth concrete. The corridor narrowed the further he walked, the sound of his own breathing echoing back to him. Except it wasn't alone. There were other breaths now. Slower, deeper, layered beneath his. He reached a door. Simple, unmarked, but somehow sacred. It stood open, just slightly, releasing the soft scent of rosewater and ash. He pushed it open. Inside, the room was lit by a single lamp, flickering with firelight that cast no shadows. 12 mats lay in a circle on the stone floor, each one empty, but warm, used, waiting. At the center of the circle, a small brass bowl filled with something dark and shimmering. He stepped forward, drawn by a rhythm he didn't hear so much as feel. And then a voice spoke, not from the room, from within him. We remember those who kneel. We protect those who do not forget. Sit, join, become. He wanted to turn back, but his body moved without asking. He knelt, placed his hands on the stone, lowered his head. And as he did, a sigh moved through the room, not his,
like breath passing through 1,000-year-old corridor. Then everything went dark. Rayhan awoke in bed, sweating, shaking, but at peace, until he looked at his palms. Dust, fine, sacred, soft, pressed into every line. He rubbed it off, thinking it was from the mattress, but when he stepped out of bed, he found something worse. His prayer mat, one he didn't own, had been laid out on the floor, east-facing, still warm. In the days that followed, the dream returned, always at 2:06 a.m., always the same hallway, always the same voice. He told no one, not yet, but something changed in his eyes. He no longer blinked as often. He began to hum in a language he didn't know. And when the elevator skipped B1 during the day, he smiled as if he already knew how to reach it anyway. The residents who had lived through Arav's time began watching Rayhan from a distance, quiet, careful, because they recognized the signs, the stillness, the soft muttering, the long silences spent staring at the walls like they were speaking back. And when someone asked the concierge if the meditation room was still off limits, she hesitated, then answered with a shrug. That was a long time ago, and it's locked now, isn't it? But that night, deep in sleep, Rayhan stood once more before the open door, and as he crossed the threshold, 12 figures rose to meet him. No faces, no voices, only presence, only remembrance. And somewhere far below the city, below cement, below time, below memory, the foundation of Daya Heights breathed in, slow and deep. And the room welcomed him, not with fear, not with anger, but with belonging. Because it had never been about one man, or one shrine, or one story. It had always been about the land, and the prayer it still waited to finish.